Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, 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 Sound. Committee Room 29. 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 Sound. Committee Room 29, 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 Sound.
That the committee meeting will be recorded, broadcast throughout the building as well as online, and just to advise everybody in the public gallery, no photos or recording of any of the meeting, and you can use the Wi-Fi. Phone must be on silent. So we're going straight to item number 5 on our agenda, which is the SL1, the feed and food miscellaneous amendments and revocations regulations NI 2026. So if you go to your papers at page 16 of the main pack, we have a clerk's memo, and we also have the department's SL1 on those papers. So can I welcome from the Food Standards Agency, Firth Piracha, who's the head of EU Relations, Trade and Legislation, and also Richard Annett, who's the head of Food Standard, Compositional Standards and Nutritional Labelling. So thank you very much for attending. You're both very welcome. I'm going to hand over to yourselves just for opening remarks, and then we'll take a few questions.
Thank you, Chair and members, for the opportunity to brief the committee. The Food Standards Agency, as you will be aware, is an independent, non-ministerial department responsible for protecting public health and consumers' interests in relation to food. Our mission is food you can trust, and our vision for the food system is one in which food is safe, food is what it says it is, and food is healthier and more sustainable. The proposed statutory rule before you today introduces targeted amendments to 6 specific pieces of food law. At the same time, it also proposes the revocation of 3 other instruments, which are now redundant. The primary purpose of the legislation is to ensure that food law in Northern Ireland remains fully operable and enforceable, including addressing some minor deficiencies we've identified in existing legislation. A central feature of the statutory rule is to strengthen enforcement provisions for enforcement authorities. It introduces specific offences for non-compliance for rules that govern prohibited and restricted substances, which can have adverse effects for humans, ensuring that breaches can be addressed in a proportionate and dissuasive manner. It enables enforcement authorities also to issue improvement notices in relation to total diet replacement products, providing a practical tool for district councils to address non-compliances and seek rectification, and without having to resort to immediate prosecution in relation to those businesses. So it's very much in line with our stepwise approach to enforcement of food law. The changes ensure that enforcement authorities will have effective, proportionate, and specific tools to hand to address non-compliance where this occurs. In addition, the rule makes technical corrections and amendments to remove redundant provisions and clarify the legislative framework. The 3 redundant provisions include the salad cream regulations, which have been in existence since 1966. But the modern regulatory framework has moved on quite significantly since that time, and now that particular piece of legislation is no longer required, and it would bring Northern Ireland in line with the other nations of the UK. We've undertaken detailed stakeholder engagement in line with our statutory responsibility for open and transparent consultation. The impacts identified have been minimal, with just one-off familiarisation costs arising for businesses and for industry, wider industry and regulators alike. So overall, the rule will strengthen enforceability of existing requirements, provide appropriate and proportionate enforcement tools for enforcement authorities, and improve the operability of legislation. So subject to Assembly approval, we hope or expect that the legislation will come into force at the end of this year. The committee will have an opportunity to scrutinise the draft rule further once it is laid. So thank you very much, and we're happy to take any questions.
Okay, pretty straightforward. You did consultation between September and November, and nobody responded. So
no responses. And in addition to the consultation that took place between September and November, we had previously consulted on the vitamins and minerals legislation back in 2020 also, when they were first proposed. And the 2 responses that we did have, one was supportive of the legislation and the other didn't raise any concerns either.
okay, I have no further questions. Anybody have any questions?
Can I just maybe ask?
Go ahead.
There was some reference made to up to 2 years imprisonment. Under what circumstances would a business owner face 2 years imprisonment?
So it very much depends on the risk that they have exposed consumers to. For example, when you look at prohibited and restricted substances, some can cause incredible consequences for people if they are included in food, impacts on the pulmonary system, cardiovascular system. So in those sorts of circumstances, imprisonment up to 2 years may be considered by the judiciary. But of course, there are, we take a stepwise approach to enforcement. That's why we're trying to introduce improvement notices. So where a non-compliance can be rectified, we work with, or the enforcement authority will work with the food business to reformulate a food product to bring it into compliance. If the improvement notice isn't complied with, then we take further action. That could result in a fine. It could, if it's on a much more serious and broader scale, and the business is not cooperative, then of course imprisonment is an option. But we would hope to try and rectify things before we get to that stage. That's why it's important that we have dissuasive penalties, and it's framed accordingly, that it's dissuasive from that very, very severe type of situation arising.
And I would just add as well that that's not brand new, so some of the existing offences and penalties have the exact same scale, so it's quite aligned with other food law.
Fair enough. Just some more reference that I made or seen in the paper that states that the amendments are broadly in line with legislation in England, Scotland and Wales. Are there any differences that will remain between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK?
There are some minor differences. because obviously we continue to follow EU legislation here in Northern Ireland, whereas in Great Britain they have evolved and continue with assimilated legislation, but the broad principles remain the same. Legislation is broadly parallel, including the enforcement provisions and tools that are available. So there is a great more deal of similarity than difference in this. But as the committee will appreciate, the UK government is in the midst of SPS negotiations with the EU, and the subject matters, i.e. the policy areas that this legislation concerns, are within scope of those negotiations. So we wait to see what the outcome of those will be. But if they are included, I would expect that alignment through GB and Northern Ireland would be restored. However, of course, it's all subject to the outcome of those discussions.
And I would maybe just add, in terms of the SR itself, this SR doesn't introduce any changes that creates any divergence. It's only introducing enforcement to enforce existing requirements.
Annie?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for that. Just a couple of questions. Would you be able to explain in more detail just what the banned substances are and what they can be used for? And second question, I noticed very minor costs have been identified, estimated at £6 per business and £10.30 per council. How were they calculated?
I'll take the first question on that. So in terms of substances, they range from substances that are either called restricted or prohibited. So one example would be ephedra herb, which was deemed to be unsafe if it was added to food. So that was then prohibited. So the enforcement powers introduced by this statutory rule would allow enforcement authorities to take action where that non-compliance was identified. So the likes of ephedra herb or yombi bark is another substance as well. They tend to be in the form of food supplements because they're quite niche products, and that's the form they're usually found in. They're prohibited to be added to any foodstuff, but they tend to be found in food supplements. Other examples are green tea extracts, where rather than being prohibited, they are restricted to less than 800 micrograms a day, plus labelling warnings for things like don't consume with other green tea products. So there's a slight difference between prohibition and restricted.
And just on the second part of the question, it's sort of, let's say, standard practice. When we sort of develop new legislation, we take an assessment of how much time and effort and work would be required for regulators or businesses to understand the legislation and put it into practice. Now, because these are vastly enforcement provisions and some tidying up provisions, we look at the length of the SR or the legislation brought forward and provide an estimate based on established sort of time cost figures for environmental health officers, for example. So it could take 30 minutes of their time to familiarise themselves with the legislation and the changes that it brings about. So that's how we calculate the costs.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Diane?
Well, just thank you, Richard, for your clarification that this is the enforcement of existing. Did I get that right? The enforcement of existing regs.
Yeah. So this statute rule doesn't introduce any new requirements on food business operators. What it does is allow our district councils to be provided with tools to take enforcement action if non-compliances are found in businesses or related to products. It does a number of other things, including revocation of redundant regulations and also fixing some minor errors that have been found. So in terms of the enforcement, it's attaching enforcement to rules that apply rather than introducing rules applying to food business operators.
Okay, so it is more about the enforcement than it is about the rules.
Yes.
Okay. So what would the issues be of enforcement changes here in Northern Ireland as opposed to, that we're not the same as enforcement changes in the rest of the United Kingdom, given that we follow EU rules and they don't?
So I would say that broadly the protections provided for consumers are the same. In terms of enforcement approaches, obviously there is slight differences. Of course, because each nation will legislate in its own way. Scotland may legislate slightly differently compared to Wales, and similarly Northern Ireland may legislate slightly differently compared to England. But that does not mean that there are vastly different approaches. In terms of food law, we work within the provisional common frameworks that govern food law, food and feed safety, nutritional compositional standards and labelling, as well as food compositional standards and labelling. And working on that 4-nation basis means that we're able to coordinate, not just in terms of the immediate legislative requirements that we would want food business operators to follow, but also on the enforcement approaches across the 4 nations, so that we are not punishing one part of the nation more severely than the other. So we do take very, very similar approaches.
But just not in law?
In law, that's going to be legislated for, of course. The discussions take place on that 4-nation basis, and then legislation for each of the nations is developed in line with that policy position.
Okay, no, it's just because Northern Ireland is such a supplier of food into the GB market, we want to make sure that our access to market is not compromised. Neither is access to market from GB to Northern Ireland compromised.
I absolutely appreciate that. So qualifying Northern Ireland goods as defined within the UK Internal Market Act provide for that reassurance and unfettered market access for Northern Ireland produced food and feed. So there are no fetters and trade barriers on those goods moving from Northern Ireland to the rest of Great Britain. Similarly, via the Northern Ireland Retail Movement Scheme, as established by the Windsor Framework, GB produced food and feed can continue to move to Northern Ireland.
Okay, thank you very much for it.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, that's been very useful. So, members, just to remind you, we noted the proposed SR at its meeting on the 11th of June and agreed to schedule consideration of the policy intention at today's meeting. So, the purpose of the proposed SR is to amend existing delegated legislation regarding food and animal feed safety and standards to enhance consumer protections and clarity, and the SR is subject to the draft affirmative resolution procedure and therefore plenary debate after summer recess. So there was no responses to or call for views on the proposed rule. I'm going to take the question whenever we get a fifth member to attend the meeting. I can't take the question with only 4 here.
No, that's okay.
Okay, so I'm just going to move on then to item number 6 in our oral briefing, and I'll come back to that question at another point in the meeting. So this is a Department of Health briefing on Encompass within the transformation agenda. So can I welcome just to the meeting Dr. Paul Rice, Chief Digital Information Officer within the department, and Ms. Pippa McCabe, who's the Chief Allied Health Professional Information Officer. These are both very welcome. And we have a briefing from you, but I'm going to hand over to you, to Paul, for some introductory remarks.
I'm not going to make extensive remarks at this point, Chair, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I was just going to bring some brief apologies from Dr. David Wilson, who is the SRO currently for Encompass. He's a stroke physician at Southeastern Trust, but he's currently on a family holiday this week, and ask if the committee so desired that Dr. Dermot Hughes, who has been the SRO over the whole period of the life cycle of Encompass, I think retired for the 5th time probably around Christmas time. So if the committee felt it was appropriate to note thanks and appreciation for all of Dermot's efforts, we are absolutely clear that Encompass would not have got over the finishing line and be delivering the direct benefits for patient care that it is. If Dermot hadn't been at the helm for those years, effectively. I'm completely comfortable. You've got the brief in front of you. I'm completely comfortable at this point if you are to just make it an...
Any questions?
Exactly.
Okay, so you said there about Encompass in terms of its benefit to patients and clinicians. Today we got the department's report in relation to cancer and cancer waiting times, and it was unable to publish the 62-day target. So a key data that is crucial to us as a committee in terms of the scrutiny work wasn't able to be published, and the reason that the department are saying it's not published is because key cancer data remain under validation and not all figures can be currently reported. So from this committee's point of view, we don't know whether performance has improved, we don't know whether it's deteriorated, we don't know where patients are waiting longer, and we don't know whether the cancer strategy is working. Given that cancer is the most time critical area of our healthcare, if the department can't fully publish and validate the 62-day cancer target, how can we as a committee be confident in what the department is currently doing and the information that they have to provide cancer services effectively? So I'm making a strong assumption here that Encompass is one of the reasons why the department wasn't able to publish and validate those 62-day figures, unless you're going to tell me differently.
Well, Encompass is an intrinsic part of our system, and therefore you're absolutely right to assume it has played a part in terms of driving data for a whole host of purposes. My understanding of that particular issue, so the department relies completely appropriately on the independent view of colleagues from NISRA, the Northern Ireland Statistical Research Authority, who are based within the Information Analytical Directorate in the department, which is one of my departments or directorates. And they, having looked at that data, felt that there was a possibility of presenting an inaccurate or incomplete picture, and therefore felt that the prudent thing to do in the situation was to move ahead with that transparency and with being clear in relation to that. The investigations in relation to what has actually triggered that is ongoing in the context of the last 24 or 48 hours. It'll be about management information in the context of who's waiting, where are they waiting, when are they being treated, is somewhat discrete from statistical information that confirms that for the purposes of the reports that you're talking about. I think fundamentally it was important not to pretend that information was accurate if there was a concern, and that's why that information has been published on that, or not published on that basis, but with that caveat closely associated with it.
It's obviously embarrassing for the department, in my view, that they're unable to do it, but it's actually concerning for me as chair of the health committee that there's some issue with the data that we're not, I gather from what you're saying, going to understand today exactly what that issue is with the data.
So I'm completely committed to being clear with the committee when we understand that in greater detail, exactly what the issue has been, and more importantly how quickly it is being resolved and what that information enables us to be clear about going forward. Okay, so here's a scenario with cancer data. Can I ask, is there any other areas within the health service where performance indicators are currently subject to similar validation concerns as a result of the Encompass transition? I wouldn't want to make a complete carte blanche statement to that effect. What I can say is there's a consistent iterative process in relation to understanding data across what the span of what Encompass covers, and that quality of independence from colleagues in NISRA is really, really important to underscore and to use. In terms of other aspects of data, there has been over the 12 months and prior, South Eastern Trust, obviously now the longest standing organisation to be using Encompass. There has been consistent efforts and activities to confirm, validate all of the information in the system on a regular and routine basis between colleagues at the centre and the trusts. So that activity is a feature of everyday working life now in the context of our data scientists in the trusts and those individuals in the PHA and in central departmental resources. I don't want to come across as overly critical, because on the whole,
absolutely. We need IT systems that can provide the data that helps to develop appropriate policy, and where health professionals can look at trends and do the work that they need to do. I just have that very big concern, given that we aren't getting the true picture with regard to cancer, and this committee has a key focus on waiting lists, and particularly within cancer. And the figures that the department did provide on the whole are not good reading. Some of the figures actually, cancer waiting list has deteriorated, but the 62-day target is the most important key target, and we're not getting any figures. So I think that's very disappointing. In terms of the benefits, if I can kind of pivot towards that. So I would like you to outline, just without detailing the kind of teething problems that we know and understand with the early rollout of, but if you were to explain to me today and this committee today, what are the measurable benefits that have been delivered to date through Encompass, that would be very useful.
So if it's appropriate, we'll do a wee bit of a double act in relation to that. I think in terms of what the committee might recognise as cash releasing benefits. So there's a comprehensive benefits realisation plan sits around Encompass. In pure cash releasing terms, you find yourself, and we've been tracking this through the BSO, something as straightforward as the volume of paper that the organisations would have previously purchased, and how much of that is now no longer required in our system because of digitisation, is a significant amount of money. In addition, historically, storage of records would have been required in terms of for significant periods of time, and again, volumes of paper records being stored costs a significant amount of money. The other area I would highlight in relation to, again, cash releasing savings, although there have been comprehensive programmes of work going on in relation to prescribing for a period of time, you are also in a situation where with better governance, better oversight, better attention to what you're doing in relation to polypharmacy and prescribing, you can ensure that you are only giving those medicines that you need to give, only giving those medicines in a timely manner, etc., and that drives out efficiencies. Similarly, in relation to imaging, again, encompasses relationships with some of the other systems that we have in place currently, allows you to make sure that what you're not doing is duplicating things if you don't have to, because the information is there at your fingertips. And that's also, that also brings with it a significant patient safety benefit, because we don't want to be exposing people to potentially significant levels of radiation if that's not necessary and appropriate. So in one facet of what we refer to as cash release and savings or benefits, there is a basket of things there that I think the committee can see in literally in some of those in cold hard cash terms, that the receipts that are being paid on behalf of the HSE by the BSO are being reduced directly and consequently. There are also potential at a trust by trust basis for people to be working in terms of core hours and how they organise and deliver care in core hours. That means that the potential costs that would have arisen previously for bank and agency costs can also be deferred, because you're organising your activity and how you deliver your care much more efficiently as a consequence of having access to that information in one place. So again, those are things that speak to primarily resource and efficiency. If it's appropriate, I would turn to Pippa to outline those ones that, through her practice, but also more broadly, speak to patient safety and quality. But happy to come back as well, Chair, as appropriate.
So maybe just to introduce myself briefly, I'm Pippa McCabe. I'm a physiotherapist by background under that umbrella of allied health professional, and the lead for Encompass in the South Eastern Trust. So I'm a practicing physiotherapist, and a lot of the benefits that I think that I would love to express to you today are very challenging to measure, because we don't maybe have the appropriate baseline of information that we require. But I really want to emphasise that, particularly from a community perspective, which is where my practice lays, the visibility that we have in the system now is just completely night and day. And from a safety perspective, both for patients and for staff, that is just invaluable. So to give a patient example, if I was seeing somebody out in the community somebody that may be a very complex patient with poor memory who was known to multiple different services. And prior to Encompass coming in, I just saw my information. A nurse could have been out the same day and I wouldn't have had access to what they had done with that patient. We had multiple different systems that we needed to be able to use to get any information out of them, and none of that was really clinical information. And having access to that now really does make a huge impactful difference in the safety of us treating those patients, and vulnerability of staff going out to see individuals that we maybe don't know, and we have 2 sentences to see them. So there's a lot there, and especially from an intermediate care piece, going from acute to community settings and vice versa, that flow of information now means that we can be much more proactive and coordinated in getting these patients out more quickly with the support that they need, that then we can then reduce down and get them as independent as possible. So all of those things have made a really big difference. The other things that since we have gone live, allied health professionals have really been very proactive in how we can use the system to its best ability. So we've been really leading on some of the use of MyCare. We have now, since May this year, gone live with self-scheduling on MyCare, so the ability to book appointments through the app for urgent physiotherapy, and we've reduced our waiting times from 9 days down to 2 because people are just able to do that so much more quickly. We've also started using self-referral through MyCare, so if you need a musculoskeletal physiotherapy appointment, you can now do that online using the app, and that has reduced admin burden for the referrals coming in, when we've seen a really good uptake in that across the region. There's a lot of other work going on. The visibility of recommendations for eating and drinking and swallowing from a speech and language perspective have really improved safety for patients who have issues with eating, drinking and swallowing, which is very high risk, and that is now really visible on the storyboard. So a lot of those things, it is difficult to measure the specific benefit or improvement, but if you ask the staff or the patients, I think they would definitely tell you that it is night and day from where they were to where we are now, and going back would be very challenging.
Okay, so I'm definitely a strong advocate of MyCare because I use it regularly myself. I can see the benefits of that. So, Pippa, you say, I mean, in terms of your work, you're now seeing the whole patient picture, which is obviously very important. And in terms of inputting information onto the system, have you any experience or thoughts on that? Does it reduce the time that you're spending doing that type of administrative work?
I think certainly initially that has been challenging. Probably either a little bit similar to writing longhand notes. I've definitely found it quicker, but obviously there's different levels of digital literacy around how people find that, and how comfortable they are with using a system. So I think it probably improved it slightly. But the other thing that we are really emphasising now in our trust is the use of personalisation. And I think Dermot did mention that the last time he was here. But it's the ability for our clinicians to create smart ways of using the system. So you could type in a dot phrase that brings in a whole amount of information that normally you would take an awful lot of time to have to do. When you're placing an order, sometimes we maybe are ordering 4 or 5 different blood tests, and that would have been individual orders, but we can set up an order panel and to do that in one click and they all come through. There's lots of smart ways in the system that are increasing the efficiency of how we see patients. However, we need to get everybody doing that. So quite often with these types of software, it is mainly medics that are given that opportunity to train to use those different tools, but we've been really working very hard with our Encompass colleagues to make sure that that is afforded to every professional, because every professional needs to be efficient in this system. So we have really seen an improvement in the personalisation rates across allied health professionals and in other areas as well. Pharmacy are using it really heavily and very effectively, as well as social care coming in behind.
Okay, thank you. And Paul, you said a couple of times about the benefits, cash releasing, savings. So I don't think anybody's going to argue that that's not a good thing, because we certainly need to be saving money within our health system. But Encompass is an expensive piece of software. Can I ask what has been the total expenditure to date on the Encompass system?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to end up reading back to you the numbers I think that we provided in the pre-briefing, Chair, if that's okay. But
to get them in the public record.
Oh, sure. Apologies. I will go back. Sorry. The digital man shouldn't really be flicking through a paper-based Labour Arch folder, but we'll have that conversation another time. So expenditure to date, so March 2026 is £337 million of capital and £56.8 million of revenue. And then there's a subsequent detailed breakdown of that where the core programme has spent £229.6 million of capital, £56.8 million of revenue, and then each of the trusts in turn, their capital expenditure is South Eastern Trust 18.1 million, Belfast 32.9, Northern 19.3, Southern 18.9, and Western 18.2. I would just like to confirm that is actually within the approvals in relation to the original business case and the subsequent addendum. So at this stage, the programme is spending within the scope of what was anticipated.
What was the original business case total?
So I haven't broken it down with the original business case and the addendum. Sorry, I've just brought that as the two sums that
it's within you're saying the cost expended to date are all within the original business case.
The business case and the subsequent addendum, yes. Okay. So within the agreed envelope. So we've not overspent against those agreed totals. The differential between the different trusts will reflect both their relative scale and perhaps some specific elements of. They may provide services on behalf of the region and therefore be requiring. Because again, the underpinning piece of this sometimes is making sure that people have got the relevant laptop, mobile phone, other element of technology to actually take the care to the patient.
So in terms of further costs, are there going to be any further implementation or support costs?
There's a conversation going on currently in relation to costs as we sit and stand for this in future years. Clearly, we're still ambitious in the context of Encompass, what Pippa was outlining previously around getting the data into the system and the benefit of favourites. There have been a couple of tests of change done around ambient voice technology. So when the original business case was conceived, that wasn't a viable option. It wasn't a mature technology. That technology's got more and more mature over the period, and therefore we're exploring the extent to which there would be a deliberate added value in relation to that. That would be the product of another business case. It would have to come through in that regard. We're experiencing pressures currently on a number of fronts. We've actually been more successful than we predicted we would be in terms of the number of staff who are using Encompass, particularly in the community space. And the implications of that, again, as the committee will understand, is that you tend to pay for these things on a licensed user basis. So if you roll out the product to more people, then if you move from Netflix standard to Netflix premium because you're going to get 6 members of your family on it, you've got to pay a price consequent to that. We have had challenges in terms of retaining some of the specialist workforce that's required, the deep sort of technical knowledge. The intention initially and the profile of the resources was to suggest that we could bring and recruit people into the programme and retain them on NHS terms and conditions or HSE terms and conditions. In reality, that's proved really, really difficult. It's a global market for some of this limited talent, so that's again something which is a pressure that wasn't foreseeable. We're seeing a very deliberative drift of talent currently potentially to the Republic of Ireland because they're in a stage of their EPR procurement where some of our knowledge is very valuable to them. So I guess what I'm saying in summary, Chair, is that we've got underlying pressures emerging to continue to deliver on the terms that we're currently anticipate delivering, and we've an appetite to do new things, and obviously new things always will come with a consequent cost. Any of those will be subject to a refined business case or an addendum and an economic analysis by colleagues in the department in the first instance, and an associated benefits realisation plan that says if you want that investment, what is it going to deliver in the parameters that we've talked about: cash release, patient safety, quality, etc., etc.
Just before I go to other members, I want to kind of pivot back to the cancer in the 62 days. So will this committee get those figures when they're validated as quickly as we can after they're validated, and will we get the concerns that have caused the delay in the validation process?
I would anticipate both those things. We have to give you an explanation as to why they were not published today at the next level of detail.
Okay,
and obviously, yes, expedite providing them to you as soon as they are regarded from that independent perspective to be accurate, true and fair.
Okay, thank you. Dan?
Yes, thank you, Chair. And thank you for coming. Can I say at the outset, like, I am totally supportive of the idea that we have a digital health record, that we update our systems, that in this day and life, it's inconceivable that we run about with huge reams of paper. But I do think that there are issues to address. And Paul, I know you've kindly spoken to me about some of those issues to address. So just going back to what the Chair spoke about last, so the 62-day target and the fact that that is not within the cancer waiting times, is that anything to do with the letters? Some say up to 50,000 letters that were not issued, that were lost, or whatever way you want to describe it, via some sort of a failure in the Encompass system. The Minister was questioned about this at Health Questions on Monday.
So to answer
I didn't really get a satisfactory answer then, but so what is the reason? So is it to do with that? Because I know I've spoken to some GPs who are very concerned that they referred a patient, they did not get a response. Months later they get a response and they're worried about their patient. So is it anything to do with that?
So to answer that directly, absolutely and categorically no. There is no connection between the two
have
things.
Have you fixed that glitch in Encompass? Are we now sure that this cannot happen again?
Are you happy for me to just spend a few moments going through exactly what that rejected referrals sequence is, Chair? Just would that be helpful? Important. So ostensibly what happens is, as a general practitioner, with any of us in front of them, not only a general practitioner, but they refer to services, a consideration of whether accountability, responsibility for that care should be taken on by, let's say for this illustration, the secondary care clinician, is a determination they make after a clinical assessment and triage of that letter. If they say yes, then the individual moves on through the care process. If they say no, there was a rejected referral letter. What seems to have occurred in November last year, when we introduced the scope of Encompass was extended out to prison health, is that something was broken that meant that the automatic delivery of that letter stopped happening. Should that have occurred? No. Should the testing regimen that was applied around that time been comprehensive enough to check that not only that the new thing that went in worked as intended in prison health, but that it didn't break something else in the wider system because it is so interconnected? It should have done. Regression analysis testing should point to all of those areas of potential risk, identify them, and put you in a position to make sure that that doesn't happen. It did happen. It shouldn't have happened. But that is a fact. That it did happen, it shouldn't have happened. What has also become, and that has now been fixed, just for clarity. So as soon as it was...
Just in case I forget, is the scope of this up to 50,000 lost letters, as was indicated in the Chamber on Monday?
So the absolute number of letters will be in that sort of territory. In the context of...
Paul, that this is it's not a glitch, it's huge.
No, sorry, I don't think I said glitch. I am accepting that is not how the system should have operated, and technically something went wrong there, and it took that risk should have been identified in the testing regimen. It wasn't identified in the testing regimen. So one of the things we're doing consequent to that is fundamentally reviewing the testing regimen to ensure that any subsequent upgrade or extension of Encompass, that you test every tributary and every where that runs to make sure that it does not accidentally break it. Just to be clear, accidentally break. It was never anybody's intention, clearly, to take that functionality down. Okay. So that's what happened. What the root cause analysis work on that has further discovered is that the fail-safe that meant that when that, or if that occurred, the fact that rejected referral letter had not gone back automatically to the referring GP, there should be a process by which an administrator sees that transaction that hasn't occurred, and they should step in at that point and respond accordingly, and therefore, in effect, send it manually rather than automatically, in summary. What we've discovered is that over that period, that was not occurring. What we've also discovered is that was not occurring as comprehensively as should have been from the period of go live to today, in effect. and that what that's highlighted is that there's levels of training and education and support required to individuals to make sure that they are fully clear in their minds about what their role and responsibilities is in relation to that backstop. So we have a combination classically of a technical failure and human error over the course of that period of time. There has been a root cause analysis and an incident management exercise been going on from with a weekly cadence with all of the impacted trusts to make sure we understand the depth and detail of what has occurred, to make sure we understand how we're going to recover that position, and to make sure as far as possible, it doesn't happen again. Again, in front of this committee, as I said 12 months ago, technical breaking and human error can always come into this, but as far as possible, we should have mechanisms to ensure that it doesn't occur.
So 50,000 letters of rejection. So consultant looked at the referrals, said no, I think that an alternative treatment should be offered, or there is no further treatment required. I'm presuming that would be the options in that.
It may also be the case that the patient is already being seen by the service, or it is a duplicate referral that's come through, and that actually is quite a percentage of these, so that is why it's being declined. I think just maybe to add to your 2 points of system and user error, you could also potentially have in there variation across the trusts and the services. So for example, some of our services would not have sent a rejection letter before Encompass, therefore they were just continuing that process. And so we're having to review all of the data to understand where a rejection letter hasn't been sent, and it maybe wouldn't, there was no expectation that it would be sent, because this is across all professions. It's not just consultants, it would be district nursing and physios, etc., and they may have a different process.
So some of those individuals may have over that period picked up the telephone and spoken to the referring GP, for example. So the reason why getting our hands around the number... But if the referring GP didn't know, say for example this was a GP referral, and the referring GP did not get a letter back to say no, you don't need to do anything, or you need to do something different, or you need to repeat a test. I mean, the particular cases that I have heard of was where the referring GP was told you need to repeat a test. That was done in November, December times last year. The GP did not get any communication until months and months later, by which stage the repeated test showed a greater level of concern. So what patient harm, how have we qualified or quantified even what patient harm, or was there patient harm because of these letters not being sent out? So each of the trusts individually are looking at that next level of depth and detail to understand what, if any, patient harm would occur, had occurred, could have occurred, and then what they're doing about it. Because I'm sorry, I am only concerned about the patient outcome in all of this. I accept that the right direction of travel is the digital record. I accept that there can be problems with it. But 50,000 letters or thereabouts is a massive problem. And I think we need to know and understand in this committee, and I think the public, for confidence sake, need to know and understand what went wrong and whether or not there was patient harm and what happened, with those patients. I'm just worried about the person who perhaps should have had a repeat test, perhaps should have had an alternative treatment offered, but didn't get that, and the GP couldn't have known, or the district nurse couldn't have known, or whoever it was couldn't have known because they didn't get a letter to tell them. And I think that, are there variations in the level of letters between each trust? So which trust was the most impacted by this? There will be different variations in volumes, and again, the reality of trying to strip this down. So let's be clear: this is not how this should work. Okay, so at no point, at no point do I hope that I'm trying to give any impression here that we are happy with this situation. And I don't mean me. I mean the health and social care system has to look at this and go, what happened technically? How is that going to be avoided in the future? what happened in the relation to the fail-safe that was there, where people should have noticed that the technical route of transmission wasn't working. So here's an alternative. This is what you should do, and that's that is.
I have heard that the Northern Trust was the trust most impacted. I don't know whether that's right or wrong. That's the honest truth. I don't know, but I think in all of these things, transparency is really, really important. And this happened and was discovered at the end of last year. It started to go wrong at the end of last year, and it was discovered some months ago. And we still, I am worried that we still don't understand fully how this is going to be recovered, what the learning is, what the impact is, what the impact on patient is, etc., etc. But I want to move on. But I do think that, and I think for confidence sake, full transparency around this is massively, massively important.
Dan, sorry, I'll allow you time. Before you move on, I just want to ask a couple of supplementary questions. Excellent. On the issue. So, Pippa, I'm a wee bit concerned about the variations in the trust, because I would have thought when we have an IT system, we should have trusts doing exactly the same thing, and I certainly hope that we're moving to that. And I'm also a wee bit concerned that with an IT system, and you're saying some of these letters might not have been sent because somebody might have picked up the phone and rung the GP, but there's no record of that, so I would, if that is the case, I would still like to see the record on the IT system that people can go back on. So, those are two things that caused me a wee bit of concern when you mentioned them.
That is part of the resolution. So as well as the fix going in, there is additional build going in place that puts guardrails around that, so that if the phone has been lifted, we will be recording that in the system. So this is making our process safer from a long-term perspective. And I think, as is the case repeatedly with Encompass, the 5 trusts are working together to make sure that this is now standardised moving forward. I think we've come from a complex place of doing things at least 5 ways very differently, and Encompass is helping us.
So we're moving to an integrated system that will be uniform across all trusts. Okay, thank you. Sorry, Dan, go ahead.
No, it's. I think those are valid points, and I think that's important. I have a couple of other things that I really do want to ask. When will we be able to get information that measures the data around what Encompass does, both in terms of patient access to the system, saving money within the system, that kind of data that you would imagine that a digital system like Encompass will be able to give us? When will we move to that level of analysis? Or can we move to that level of analysis? Is this just a booking system and a recording system?
No. It's.
I'm told, the minister tells us in the House that it's really only in its infancy. It's not doing everything it can do or should do, and we need to actually make it work really, really hard for us, given the level. We're almost probably will be at £500 million to do this system very soon. So just when will we get to that stage where we get much more data and control over the data? Because it seems to me that's the only way to actually direct services appropriately in the health service.
So I'm not sure, Dan. Sorry, I'm following all of the elements of the question.
You tell me that measuring benefits. So Pippa talked quite rightly, I would imagine, about I can access somebody's information. I can understand, if I'm a speech and language therapist, whether they have difficulty in swallowing, etc., which is hugely important, massively important. But apart from that, will we get other data out of the system which will help us to improve services going forward? Maybe that's a better way of putting it.
So, across the piece, there's an annual yearbook that Encompass produce with rich patient stories about the benefits that are being derived from having an integrated system. If members are not familiar with that, I will absolutely be, my first action out of here will be making sure that you've got access to that document to understand it. Because across the piece, those patient stories and those accounts from carers have to be weighed in the scales. They're not, as Pippa highlighted earlier, that the notion of benefits, not all of them are able to be put down on on a spreadsheet or on a profit loss account. So there's a whole range of ways in which we have heard from our population that say, I now have more control of my healthcare than I did beforehand. You can't measure that in anything other than something beyond anecdote. It's case study, it's testament, whatever phrase we want to use. In the context of how it's used as an instrument of organising and delivering health and care, it's giving people access on an hour-by-hour, day-by-day basis to understand the inputs and the priorities and how they. So we've done a piece of work in the last number of weeks around theatre utilisation and a dialogue supported with EPIC with clinical colleagues that say theatre scheduling, how long you get into the granular detail of how do we make sure that this particular theatre session is operating and delivering as efficiently as practically possible. That's exactly all possible. That's all and possible within the system.
Will you be reporting on that?
So reporting in the sense of, again, I can give an account of that to the extent that we say that's 7 minutes shorter this month or this week than it was last week. There's a point of proportionality in relation to some of these things, but absolutely, again, one of those sorts of examples would be something I would more than happy talk to the committee with and bring a colleague more qualified than I to understand how their life in a theatre context is working more effectively and more efficiently. So the reality is that there are micro examples, there are examples within services, there are examples that are now about how we're doing or supporting an innovation that is becoming province-wide. All of those examples are available and if the committee don't feel that they're hearing enough of those and that our population more broadly are hearing enough about those, then we will put our foot down on that communication and that amplification of those. Not as good news stories per se, but as factual accounts of the difference that the system's making.
Can I just ask finally about inappropriate use of Encompass? And you've kindly spoken to me about a number of cases, and I don't in any shape or form want to go to those individual cases at all. But I have been contacted by people who are very worried that their private medical information has been accessed with no clinical reason for that information to be accessed. And I do know that you are investigating some cases, and we'll leave that there. I get emails about this. I got another email about this week. So this is clearly an issue that people are worried about, Paul. And I suppose in my conversations with you, there are two things, and it is worth putting on the record of the committee today what you're doing about inappropriate access to Encompass. I think that is very worthwhile to publicly say in this committee context today. But I suppose the other thing that worried me is that there's no checking in the system itself per se, other than if you leave an electronic record that you've accessed it. But there's no spot checking in the system that can act. So in other words, if I wanted to know where my details accessed, I would have to have a reason to go to you and say, can somebody check where they accessed? But most people will never think of that. And there's no spot checking in the system at all for inappropriate access. And that does worry me significantly. And it does worry me that in more sensitive areas that we're only now beginning to look at how we can better protect people's information. So while I'm all for, and I can't imagine in this day and age why you wouldn't have a digital system, but I do think a digital system needs to have safety as part of its really uppermost considerations. So I do want you to comment on the things that can be done to prevent that inappropriate access, and secondly, why you have not developed any kind of spot checking of records, and what happens and who's responsible for those who are found to have inappropriately accessed records.
So again, just to be clear, this is an extremely serious matter. Fundamentally, all professionals should be aware of their obligations in relationship to management of patient data, and if they don't have legitimate interest in looking at that record, they shouldn't be anywhere near it. There is and that's part of people's well understood duties as a professional, and they will have been through extensive training, annualised training to that effect, to underscore that and emphasise that, and that training is also a prerequisite before you can actually get access to the Encompass system. We have seen in England, and unfortunately in the province, situations and circumstances where people have felt it was their God-given right to go and nose into other people's information. It's not acceptable. It's fundamentally not acceptable. What we have done in relation to Encompass, what's always been there, has been the parameters that I've outlined in terms of education, training and trusting people in relation to their professional duties. What we've done additionally, most recently, is incorporate, in terms of the login screen, a very clear message to anybody, underscoring and reminding them of their responsibilities with respect to patient records, and that if they don't have a legitimate interest in being in that record, that they shouldn't be in that record. Some of the trusts have got punchier than others in that regard, so it's none of your business is a message that features on the screensaver of a number of trusts in that regard. The third thing that we've done in relation to, particularly in relation to, and this decision will still be made locally, but high profile media events, the highest level of prurience seems to follow when something tragic has happened in the media. If we look at the examples from across the water, the Stockport incident, the incidents in Nottingham that have been covered by the BBC in the last couple of weeks, are occasions where people have looked at records and looked at information when they had no legitimate interest in so doing. So we've introduced a similar in case of emergency break glass provision in the record in Northern Ireland. So ostensibly a judgment will be made were someone and it's not always A&E, but it's often A&E where someone is admitted in these situations or circumstances. A judgment will be made very quickly in that situation as to whether this, in case of an emergency break glass solution, I'm making it adding another level of security and permission before someone can get into the record. It's an incredibly difficult balancing act, because the reality is that all of the benefits and merits of joined up care, of ready and accessible access to all relevant clinical information to allow expeditious judgment about what and how treatment should proceed, weighs heavily against locking things down to the extent that in any situation or circumstance there's a risk that you wouldn't make the right clinical decision in that moment because you're not getting to the essential information and the vital information as quickly as you can. So that's the balancing act we're always working with, and we are back fundamentally to relying on people to understand what their professional responsibilities and accountabilities are. The investigations that are undertaken where a suspicion has arisen, and that suspicion, you're right, is triggered, if you like, after the fact by someone, by a person of concern saying what has gone on here in the main, then Encompass gives you a complete digital footprint and allows you to go in forensic detail into who accessed which record at what point in time, and then you can go into a detailed conversation with that element of the workforce to say, okay, of those X number of people, we can see why these people were involved in looking at that record because they were relating to that individual in terms of providing direct care, and so on. And so you titrate those numbers down to the point that you identify a cohort of individuals where you think it's not obvious to me from doing this analysis why they've been looking at that record. And then they're subject usually to a comprehensive HR process from that point forward. The judgment ultimately about what sanction is for the local employer, but the full range of sanctions would be available in that situation or circumstance, including referral to professional registrative bodies and, if necessary, to the criminal justice system.
Has this happened in Northern Ireland?
Have people looking at the record inappropriately happened?
No. Well, we know that it has, but has referrals to professional bodies or further sanctions happened just in terms, so we're all clear that there is accountability, that you will be held accountable for this inappropriate access.
I don't know the answer to that on the basis of these are individual decisions and processes run by the trusts, not run by the department. I don't know what the outcome has been in those situations and circumstances, but like you, I'm aware of a Belfast Telegraph article from the 6th of June about levels of access and inappropriate access. All I can say is that the range of sanctions that have been used in other jurisdictions would be available here, should the employer so wish.
Thank you very much. It is I understand that it's a very difficult issue, but it's also a really important issue that people are assured that their private medical information is not readily available to whoever wants to see that. And I have had occasion to forward communication. You're aware of that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Danny.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, first, I just want to declare an interest as a Band 5 nurse working in South and Eastern Trust. I'm a user of Encompass and I use it regularly, as do obviously a lot of nurses. I had a few questions just following on from what Diane was asking about the letters lost first. Now, when this broke initially in early June, it was 12,000 letters. And then recently, at question time, the Minister suggested it would be significantly higher, and there was a suggestion it could be as high as 50,000 letters, but that was not confirmed. We've heard here today that you've identified the rejected referral pathway. So a GP has referred to a consultant and the rejected referrals did not go back to the GPs. Can you confirm that it was only those rejected referrals that were lost?
In the context of the technical glitch in November, that is the workflow that it impacted on. Danny, that is exactly what the workflow it impacted on. And then the wider investigation has then brought in, as I was outlining, the fact that people's use of the system from the day it was turned on in this specific circumstance has not been, if you like, compliant. So effectively why those numbers have increased is that because of undertaking the very investigation that you would have expected us to take, we then looked at the three relevant periods, the period being the go live from each trust to the point in time at which it broke, the point in time when it broke up until it was fixed, and the point in time from it was fixed to today. So you've got a technical element to that, and you've got a behavioural element to that.
Okay, and it's only rejected referrals that were affected.
All of these have been subject to clinical triage by a secondary care consultant or another and have been rejected. Yes, it's really important, and I'm glad you've asked me that a couple of times, but it's really important for the confidence of the wider public to know this is not about a situation where they have been referred on for treatment and something has gone untoward. Yeah. This is about a point where a clinical triage has been undertaken, and what the GP is unaware of is the outcome of that.
Yeah, but I refer back to what Diane was asking about as well, where a consultant may have written back to a GP asking for further tests, and then that letter didn't get generated then, so that correspondence wasn't generated then as well. Is that correct?
My understanding is that none of any of the things that would have featured in that rejected referral letter, because that rejected referral letter didn't flow back to the source, then any elements or aspects of that. Now, just for clarity, we have been working through the nature of all of those letters. The trusts have been working through those with clinical leadership, looking at all of that correspondence and determining that the information has moved to general practice now as rapidly as it can in relation to plugging that information gap. So that information deficit is being plugged and being plugged in priority order of those patients of concern where they would be 2-week wait, red flag, urgent, for example.
Yeah, and we're trying to ascertain the level of patient harm if there is any.
Yeah, each trust in turn will be going through an exercise to understand exactly that point.
Okay, I want to take it back just to the full costs. Now, You were talking to the chair about this just at the start of your briefing. The briefing that you had sent us, the financial position briefing, I pulled that up and I was doing some reading around it. You're probably aware of this. The Northern Ireland Audit Office Major IT Projects Report from July 2025.
I'm aware of the document.
Yeah. So Encompass was a case study within it, case study number 1.
Yes.
Could you tell us the outline business cost for Encompass in 2018?
I'm sorry, I didn't bring that information for the committee's attention today, and apologies if that was the level of depth and detail you require. Happy to.
You're grand. The Audit Office outline business cost in 2018 for Encompass was 982.5 million, according to the Audit Office report. Does that sound familiar?
Well, I'm aware of that number in the document. I think, again, it's important for us, and I'm happy to do this as we go forward, to be very, very detailed about what did they include within and incorporate within that calculation. Because, as you will know, in many of these situations and circumstances, there will have been routine investment anticipated for the level of digitisation that existed in the health service before Encompass. So I just think it's really important that we don't get in a situation where it feels. I think there's a key difference between, if you like, what has been additional consequent to the decision that was made in relation to Encompass as distinct from what would have been the cost regardless, because we did have some systems that we were maintaining digitally to that point, and many of those.
I'd be coming to that as well.
And many of those systems become, where would have been end of life, would have been. So it's a complex commercial picture and a complex picture of what have you introduced, what have you sunsetted, etc., which may be again. And sorry, jumping ahead.
Well. So the outline business cost was 982.5 million. That increased quite significantly, up to 1.95 billion. Does that sound familiar?
Again, I mean, I'm happy to accept that you're reading from the National Audit Office report in relation to that. I don't know how far, again, their calculation is premised on. Again, I don't want to be a broken record, but for the record, but I do not know what their calculation is premised on. I am aware that there were adjustments made and an addendum was produced consequent to things like the impact of the pandemic that recognised that the costs will have altered from the original business case.
Yeah, and it went up by £947 million from the original business case, according to the report. So up to 1.95 billion. And also regarding the pandemic as well, I think the planned rollout was held back by about 19 months, I think. A couple of questions you'd mentioned just about the systems that were already in place. Encompass was to replace 45 legacy systems. Some of those legacy systems are still in operation at the minute. My understanding is that they cost at the minute £6.5 million per year. Is that correct?
Again, I do not have the sum total of either the number of those systems nor the total quantum of cost. But you're absolutely right to highlight that a legacy system, persistent a legacy system, will have licensing costs and will have with that potentially contingent storage costs and costs to train and maintain people who can run that system going forward. So what you're doing overall is try and rapidly, as appropriate, to get out of using the old things that ideally you no longer need because the new system replaces those.
Well, you say rapidly, but the date for the legacy systems to be decommissioned is March 2029. Are you familiar with that date?
And again, some of that may well be related by contractual so there may be some of those systems where in a cycle from 2019 to 2029, there is a 10-year cycle in which that particular product has been commissioned. There'll be lots of nuance in relation to why that was set as the long stop in terms of retiring all of the legacy systems.
So we have Encompass that is now up and running in all trusts, all singing, all dancing, doing everything, but we're still keeping the legacy systems on track until March 2029 at a cost of £6.5 million per year. You mentioned archive and data storage there as well. I understand that there is archival and data storage from the legacy systems going on, and I think the date for that is to be December 2028 for that is to be finished, and the cost of that is to be £10 million. Were you aware of that as well?
Again, in relation to, we have extant legal responsibilities in relation to information pre-Encompass. Again, the judgment will have to be made with clinical support in certain circumstances and with clear legal guidance about the nature of how long that information has to be maintained or stored going forward. Again, you'll be aware of the potential for litigation, be aware of other reasons, and so the dynamic that says you've got a new system in the course of affording that new system in your business case, you've suggested that you will be able to replace existing systems, is entirely consistent with any business case for moving forward with an enterprise electronic patient record. So the way in which you've articulated that in those time frames are what I would have expected and would expect in any enterprise electronic patient record.
Okay, are those costs included in the table that you've given us?
No, I've given you spend to date. Sorry, the ask was, as I understood it initially from the correspondence, was expenditure to this point in time. Encompass is with us in the first instance in terms of this contract for till halfway through financial year 2033 to 2034.
Okay, so the full outline business cost at the minute is 1.9 billion, 1.95 billion. That's up until that period of time. And this is the only spend that you have had. I know it's cited as the installation and implementation phase of Encompass. Is there any other costs that are not on that table that have been spent?
I'm completely behind transparency in this context. If there is an issue that the committee would like to sit down with, and I will, I was an accountant 1,000 million years ago, but I'm not a qualified accountant. So I would like to sit down with a colleague who can take you through this level of detail to understand what was the NIO scope when they thought they were pricing Encompass, and what has occurred over the period of spend to date, and what do we see as the spend horizons over the coming years. Where are we looking to retire legacy systems? What will we release from those, etc., etc. Apologies if this was the level of forensic analysis of the financial implications of Encompass that colleagues had required today. I would have come with that information and with a colleague to be best placed to provide all of that context and specificity.
I don't think it's completely forensic, but I think myself and Diane had raised questions at a previous session, and there were questions as to the year-on-year spend of Encompass, how much had actually been spent, because what we were being told is there were additional costs that hadn't been foreseen, and they were just rolling in and just being added on. So what we were asking for was a clear picture of how much Encompass was initially supposed to have cost, how much it actually cost, how much extra costs are being added on year, and how much it's costing trusts, the likes of the data storage, the likes of the ongoing legacy systems. What are these extra costs that are embroiled in this? The difference that I see between the table that you've sent us, where the total is £337 million in capital and 56.8 in revenue, that is very, very different from the audit office figures, where they use Encompass as a case study, and they have much, much bigger figures. So I don't know where that discrepancy is. Can you explain it, or?
No, and as I say, it's completely appropriate for us to sit down and do a line-by-line comparison. I do not know what was regarded as, from a National Audit Office perspective, as the total cost envelope that they regard as Encompass as being responsible for.
Okay. There were some lessons in the Audit Office report as well about needing to have the right people with the right skills in place on the project teams, and the importance of taking all steps to make sure competitive tensions throughout the procurement process, and a couple of other lessons as well. And one in particular, just as I've spoken about there, a clear understanding of the nature, the extent and the cost of the legacy systems to be replaced, and a clear path to achieve this. I think we do need a bit more detail. I would appreciate maybe another session with a bit more detail. I don't think we're going to get much more than that otherwise, because I'm still quite confused about the initial cost of this, how much has actually cost, and compared to the table that you've sent us today. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Just on the back, I mean, was there any engagement with the Audit Office either before, during or after their report when they used Encompass as a case study?
I tried very hard. The committee appreciate it. I didn't want to play the I've only been here for a year card too many times today. I don't know how far we've got through that I've managed to resist that one. So if you don't mind it, this is I know I only get that joker once. It would have been it would have been unforeseen. They couldn't have done it in a vacuum.
No,
the extent to which the conversation was, at what level that conversation was, at what depth that conversation got into, I can't speak to.
Just in the back of what Danny's asking, because I'm not sure at this point we need another session, but what would be good is if we actually had something back in writing, just clarifying and comparing.
Completely. There's two columns required
the two
here.
sets of figures.
Yeah.
Are you content enough with that, Danny? Okay.
Yes, Chair, thank you. Appreciate it.
Alan Robinson.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of quick questions, Paul. The number of patients who have registered for MyCare, I see you tell us that they're in the region of 328,000. Did you set a target for the number of people who were going to register for MyCare? What was that target? Do you think you're on target? Are you encouraging greater uptake? What is the process in which to encourage greater uptake?
I mean, there's no absolute target, because ultimately it's a matter of personal liberty as to whether somebody decides to pull the MyCare onto their phone, and ultimately whether they've got access. I would say over the last couple of months, hand in glove with I think the committee's previously had an update on the This Is Our Health programme, hand in glove with that, whether it was the Balmoral show, whether it was the Foyle Maritime Festival, which was very, very wet last weekend, or any of the other things. There is a proactive campaign, both collectively and on a trust-by-trust basis, to promote and extend the use of MyCare, using QR codes around lots of venues of care, etc., etc. So the number is encouraging. We would also have an ambition going forward to add more functionality into MyCare, and I can see that in turn then appealing to another set of individuals. The absolute numbers need to be thought of in respect to, it's unlikely that anybody under 16 will download MyCare per se, but there are also mechanisms in place for parents, if they want to, in situations, to draw people into that MyCare community. So, the short answer is I'd like every citizen in Northern Ireland to have access to MyCare and use it. Equally, it's important to know that if you've had no contact with healthcare, or particularly secondary care, you won't have a purposive reason to have downloaded MyCare at this point. Because why would you? It would just be another app taking up space on your phone. So again, there's another, in the context of setting targets, we don't want to will people into a relationship with secondary care if they don't have one. So that's the other reason why there's no absolute target, if that makes sense.
Just another quick question. You tell us in the paper that there is another module called Beacon that is yet to be implemented, and that this is subject to business case approval. What is the cost to implement Beacon, just to follow on from what Danny's been talking?
So again, on the basis of the phrase subject to business case approval, we won't have worked that up to this point. The economists in the department are very efficient in saying, if you haven't got the budget, don't bring a business case to my attention yet. So, but there will be a range of that functionality. Those Epic don't stand still. As a supplier partner, they are innovating globally currently. They are introducing capability based on artificial intelligence. So, this is a dynamic environment. At every point going forward where we think there is a clear case for the health and care of the population of Northern Ireland to benefit from further investment around Encompass, or with then we will weigh that up. We will create a business case to that effect, but the merits of that business case will be adjudged against other business cases, and were we to be successful in that, then to Danny's earlier point, we'd be spending more money in this regard. But that would be because a number of people are completely convinced of the value and merits of that. This is not an exercise in spending money for the hell of it.
Yeah, well done again.
Thank you. The chair's been very generous today, Paul. I don't know whether you think it's generous or not. The wonderful thing about this committee being live streamed is that you get messages sort of as you're doing it. It appears that the problem, as far as I knew, was identified, I'm talking about the missing letters, was identified in November 25, but it now appears that some trusts have written to GPs indicating that actually this may have been going on for as long as a year beforehand. Are you aware of this?
Yeah, so sorry, I think, to go...
Just so that we're clear about the extent of the problem.
Just to go back to the segmentation that I thought I'd outlined to the committee, and apologies if it wasn't clear, is that there is a period where the technical reason for these rejected referrals not to come back to general practice is the period between November, when Encompass was extended to prison health, and to the May date that you're familiar with in 2026, and then the technical fix in relation to that was put in, and the referral letters are now moving back in the way that they should. What the work to understand that has revealed is that why didn't the fail-safe operate? Why didn't the human bit that was meant to catch the technical failing, why didn't that work? Well, it didn't work because people were not using the system to the way that they should have done in that regard. And that's now, what that is now highlighted is that there's a training requirement and a gap, which would have meant that some people using the system earlier were still not using the system in the way as it should have been used. And that indeed, a small portion of people from the middle of May, when the technical thing's been fixed, and there's been quite a lot of scrutiny on this, are still not using the system in the manner that they should have done. So that's why the numbers are larger, and why the numbers reflect 3 periods, and why I was trying to be clear that it's again a combination of a technical break and how long, folks, how are you using this system? Are you using this system as in the manner and fashion that is intended to be used? So our energies to fix the technical bit were rapid and prevailed. It worked. Our energies on the longer term piece in relation to education, training, all of the things that Pippa highlighted about favourites and that's an ongoing exercise and activity that will go to the future. That's what we've got to do. Human beings either forget how they've been trained, don't pay as much attention as you want to be. Maybe some new people coming into the system feel at the depth of the training that they got didn't set them up except as they wanted to be, etc., etc. That's what we are dealing with in terms of the total picture of those rejected referral letters not flowing back to general practice.
And to be clear, it is accurate to say that some trusts are now going back as far as November 24 and looking at that.
They're going back to the day and hour that they started using the system to check that the human beings,
so some trusts will be at different points.
Correct.
Okay,
and
that's fine.
Sorry, and that the human beings have been using the system as intended from that point.
Thank you.
I mean, it does, I suppose, highlight a conundrum in that we need to move, but any system is only as good as the people who operate it, and this is kind of thrown up. I mean, I've never used Encompass, so I don't know if it's a complicated system to use or the training has been inadequate, but there's obviously been something that just has not been right in this process. If we're talking about, large numbers of people not inputting the correct...
It's important to understand the total volumetric that we're talking about here. So in terms of over this period of time, you're well north of 1 million of referrals occurring in the Northern Ireland health and care system in that context. I mean, I got this far, and people who know me are amazed that I haven't used an analogy. But unfortunately, we have cars on roads. We have people who pass driving tests. We have things creep into the way in which people behave. Some of those individuals, the original training will not have been appropriately tailored for them, and they should have shouted up. We should, we're trying to work in a no blame culture. We're trying to work in a context where if people don't feel best equipped to do their role, that they're in a position to get support to do that.
maybe just take you back to that variation as well. So the training is role-based, and across the trust this is probably done by different people, admin, clinical, depending on what service they work in, and with 80,000 odd staff to get this right, and potentially a variation across there, that adds another level of complexity. But alongside the resolution, there is new tip sheets, new training being developed to make sure that we are getting this right from moving on.
Okay. Al?
Thanks very much. Just a couple of small points, Chair. I suppose the questions today have been sort of concentrating on costs and the setups and everything else, but we haven't really sort of touched on the benefits of the scheme. And certainly one of the benefits is, as the Minister has stated, is improvements in care quality and productivity. It's hard to put a monetary value on the improvement of care to patients, but my initial experience with Compass, I didn't have a good experience at the first because of a human error that you've talked about, an initial human error with people maybe just not used with what their responsibilities were towards putting stuff on the Encompass and following it up with maybe hard copy letters to the patient. But just recently, I had some just routine tests done, and the result coming back to me, they wouldn't have been life-changing, but you like to see reassuring information coming back. And 3 days after I had attended the Ulster Hospital to get those tests done, I was able to access the results and the letter from the consultant on Encompass. And a hard copy letter didn't come until about 2 weeks after that. So it saved me certainly 2 weeks of concern maybe. But if you had somebody that was maybe expecting a result that would be a life-changing result, those couple of weeks, you just couldn't put a value on the person getting either the news that they needed some further treatment or that they were in the clear. You just couldn't put a monetary value on that. But in terms of the scheme, is it designed in the future to save money? I mean, is it a case of not only investing in a system that is going to improve patient care and so forth, but is it designed to save money, to make the whole system more efficient and to increase productivity that will result in monetary savings going forward?
Yeah, additionally to what I mentioned earlier on, it does just give you a chance in a managerial role to have an overview of everything that's going in that workflow and in that pathway. I highlighted earlier, and this is a clinically important safety issue, but we don't want to be scanning people, jabbing people, prescribing medicines we don't want to be doing any of that stuff that we don't need to. And the information at your fingertips to allow you to make that decision differently, to look at the record and say that information is there, to look at that image and say that's still current. All of those things mean another intervention, another process of care will not be required. So all of those are efficiency savings in very, very real terms.
But also, I presume that would help, the information that you gather would help in terms of putting together a business case maybe for a vital piece of new equipment that if you didn't have that evidence that Encompass would give you, your business case maybe wouldn't stack up. But that bit of equipment might be like just a lifesaver for people going forward.
There's a phrase about electronic patient records shining light on dusty surfaces, and in some respects that can speak to patient safety and quality, but it speaks to a whole set of things. I'd mentioned one of the articles in the Belfast Telegraph. I pulled another one earlier on that was unfortunately about clinical care that was substandard because the quality of the noting wasn't there. You now have effectively access to that information. You can't not put the information into a relevant level of legibility, for example. A key concern in terms of patient safety and quality. We are beginning, and again, I know talking about being in the foothills a year after something might seem still not to be fast enough, but the opportunities in our wider ambitions around innovations, health and life sciences, having the data for 1.9 million people, having that over a life course, a clinical life course, but also with conversations with appropriate guardrails with other departments about what does this tell us if we bring it together in relation to our communities, what does this tell us about turbocharging the neighbourhood model, what does this tell us about life sciences research on a global basis and why Northern Ireland will be open for business with our world-class universities and the range of entrepreneurs. This is an asset base that we will continue to return to and use and leverage and exploit going forward. We will attract net new income for our health service, which desperately needs it, from some of these opportunities that you simply cannot derive from having all of your information landlocked in bits of paper.
I suspect that the history will record that it was a useful investment.
I have a conversation on a weekly basis with colleagues in Scotland and the Republic of Ireland in particular who are incredibly envious of the position that we start. I am not complacent about the things that we need to fix, but we have a number of our neighbours who are incredibly envious about the progress that we've made and the ambition that sits around this table as much as out there in the HSC.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Paul, Pippa. That's been very useful. Appreciate that. Okay, members, we're just going to. You're free to go. You can sit at the back and listen to the rest of the committee if you want.
It'll be time for a cup of tea.
Okay, we're going to go backwards now to the beginning of the meeting, members. So apologies. The policing board is running late today, so I'm going to note apologies from all three. They may well join at some point. Danny, will you want to come in on the Encompass stuff?
No, just to give apologies for Nuala. There was one thing I did want to ask just about Encompass, if you wouldn't mind, Chair.
Yep, go ahead.
That's what the other room.
That's fine. Okay.
Go ahead, Danny.
Thanks, Danny.
Thank you. Chair, just to go back to what Dan was talking about, the level of harm that the trusts are now investigating, just to make sure we can write to the trusts and ask them to furnish us with any results of NAS investigation about the level of harm caused by the missing letters.
I think we should write to the department and let them follow up with the trust, so happy enough with that. Yep. Okay, so we have apologies from Colin, Linda and Nuala. Number 2 on the agenda is the Chair's business. So on Tuesday we had the formal, I give my apologies, I wasn't able to attend the formal briefing from Forgotten Voices and the National Autistic Society. That was on Tuesday. So members had a briefing from the National Autistic Society and parents from the Spotlight programme providing an update. A number of important issues were raised at the briefing on Tuesday. So if members are content, following that meeting, the committee is going to write to the department to request the following: information on plans to create more residential beds and increase the number of residential facilities. We're also going to write asking about the number of patients currently waiting needs assessment for children, what work is taking place in relation to providing lifelong plans for children with complex needs, what co-production has there been with families on producing plans and developing services. We're also going to seek further information on the transport issue in the South Eastern Trust that prevented families from accessing respite care, further information on the scoping exercise, and also what advocacy support services are available to families to support them through meetings and discussions about the care for their children. So that's what came out of the meeting on Tuesday. Is everybody content with that? Okay.
Sure, if I could just ask about the ministerial, the summit meeting that was held on Tuesday in the afternoon. Did we receive invitations? Because I have no record of having received that in it, but I might have done. But it's just, it seemed a very poor choice of a day to have a summit, particularly on the last sitting of the Assembly when we were trying to get a lot of legislation tied up on that last day. So just a very, very poor choice of.
I'm not sure if you're criticising your minister there, Alan, because I presume he organised it.
No, well, actual fact, the minister, contrary to what you might think, the minister was actually, I think, spitting feathers on Tuesday about aspects around it that he didn't go into any great detail with me, but there were
I mean, I did a meeting with the Minister and he told me he was organising a summit, so I'm only putting that assumption together. I thought it was a poor day, Tuesday. We did get an invite. I had said that I would go after the voting on the justice, but just the way things went, I
Did
didn't.
all of the committee get an invitation?
Yeah, we did. But I do take your point. A different day would have allowed it better. But I mean, let's hope the message has been hammered home in terms of all of the things that need to be hammered home in relation to that. Recess members, just over recess now that we're entering that, standard practice to delegate authority to the Chair and Deputy Chair during periods of recess to submit views on the releasing or withholding of information in any non-routine or contentious freedom of information requests received by the committee. So any such views expressed would be brought to the attention of the committee at the first meeting after summer recess. So are members happy to agree to delegate authority to the Chair, myself and Danny, Deputy Chair, to submit views on the releasing or withholding of information in any non-routine or contentious freedom of information request received by the committee?
Content.
Thank you. So the committee will consider an end of session report in September as agreed by the Chair's Persons Liaison Group in June 2024. So that's it. Draft minutes then. I can refer everybody to the draft minutes of the meeting held on the 25th of June. It's page 5. Everybody content? Okay, thank you. Matters arising. So can I just refer members to page 2 of our table paper? So that contains the report on our visit to London with the Permanent Secretary on the 2nd and 3rd of June to look at primary care and the neighbourhood model. So also included in the table papers is the report on the committee's joint event with the Mental Health Champion held on Thursday the 4th of June. Are members content to forward the event report to the department for comment and to share them with the organisations that attended the Mental Health Champions event? Content? Okay. I mean, I think it's worth reading the report of our visit to London for those who weren't able to attend, because it was very useful. I certainly come away enlightened about things that we could do here that will allow for greater access, allow for better patient outcome. One of them, and I didn't raise it during Encompass, but one of them is other systems that can link into Encompass and be used in a far greater preventative manner, where GPs can see the bigger picture of patients, whether it's clusters of diabetes or different things, and actually identify patients to do preventative work and spend time so that those kind of patients aren't ending up in A&E and etc. So it would be worth reading that, because I presume we'll come back to that issue in the not too distant future. So moving then on,
Right,
Danny,
Chair.
you were looking to come in.
Chair, do you mind if I just add something into that?
Go ahead.
Just about that trip to London, I took a lot away from it as well, and I think the report covers it really well. One thing I just wanted to highlight that I thought does remain an item of concern over here is the lack of a practitioner health and wellbeing service. I think that was delivered in the Hurley Clinic. I think Northern Ireland's the only part of the UK where there isn't a practitioner health and wellbeing service, and obviously our medical health professionals, don't have access to that in a time when they may well need it. And just to highlight it to the rest of the committee, and it may be something that we should focus on. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the Permanent Secretary was there and he's not here to speak for it, but I got the impression that was something he was fully supportive of and would be implemented, because it is an anomaly that we don't have one. It might actually be worth just writing to the department and ask for an update on its implementation.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on then, item number 7, oral briefing from the department on access to palliative care scoping exercise. So we'll just invite in our... Oh, sorry, before they come in, forgot the SR. So remember, some of you have landed in, we took evidence in the SR. It's been before the committee before, but I had to actually formally ask members if they're content with the proposal for the statutory rule, the feed and food miscellaneous amendments, revocations, regulations NI 2026. Content?
We're going to reserve our view on that.
Okay. Everybody else content? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. So now moving back then to item number 7. So access to palliative care, and we'll invite in our guests.
Sure, I'll have to excuse myself at a quarter past 4. I'm sorry.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so Just welcome Gearóid Cassidy, Director of Adult Palliative Care, Neighbourhood Model Policy, Roger Kennedy, Co-Director of Neighbourhood Care, and Paul Cavanagh, Director of Neighbourhood Director. So members, our papers are at page 47 of the main pack, and I'm going to hand over to yourselves. Gearóid, I presume, for introductory remarks.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I'm going to keep that very short, if you don't mind. Not least because we've had these discussions before a few times. But I want to say, first of all, thank you very much for the invite for coming here. This is my fourth time here since this inquiry's commenced. First time with a new job title, though. I think that's kind of important for how we want to work going forward. So I mean, for palliative care has come under the responsibility of the kind of primary care directorate in the department up till now. But informed by the committee's report, we've made some structural changes in the department to make sure we're giving due focus to palliative care as a standalone set of issues. So I think that's going to be important. We've got I think there's an opportunity here, with the committee's report, with the new structures in the department. So I'm a new director with a new team under me. My colleagues will describe they've got new arrangements in SPPG. We obviously have, I've got a new boss, and he's a new assistant secretary in the department now, whose responsibility incorporates palliative care. So there'll be a new level of focus there at the highest level in the department. And we've got neighbourhood as well, which I think is a kind of a new opportunity for really taking forward the palliative agenda. So I think there's a lot to be, whilst we've been having detailed discussions for a while now, there's an opportunity for a new start here, I think, as well, into how we move forward and how we work in partnership going forward. We want to do that. We want to do that with the committee. We want to do that with partners, and we are building those relationships with partners to make sure that we can move forward as one. And I think just we'll come on to it, but I think the neighbourhood provides a real opportunity for palliative care. I know we've discussed, and you're kind of raised our attention there. I think there's a complete synergy between the two things, and I think that we can come into that under questioning. But just want to say. I have really welcomed the opportunity to come back here, especially following our last discussion, which I think, obviously the committee wasn't satisfied with the department's response at that time. I hope we've got a slightly better story to tell now, and maybe rather show a better face of what was already underway than we did at the first session. So I don't know, Paul, do you want to say a small bit?
Maybe just by way of adding in, Chair, and thank you for the opportunity to join the committee today. We obviously, I've taken on a role in April of Director of Neighbourhood Care. And the committee, I know, has been briefed on some of the initial thinking in relation to the neighbourhood care model, and I think it's a significant development for us. But one of the things we've done within our group, within the department SPPG, was we've reorganised ourselves. We've obviously, with me as a director, now with the directorate, and we've drawn together a lot of the parts of the commissioning system and the performance system that we think initially are required for us to take forward neighbourhood. And our focus in terms of taking forward the model is on vulnerable older people. And we felt strongly that we needed to then bring in the palliative care and end-of-life care team, which had previously been sitting in another directorate. So Roger now is within my directorate with his responsibility for that team. And we were also very keen to bring in other parts of the SPPG work, such as long-term conditions and inclusion health and so on, beginning to gather together some of the people who will be key, I think, in the work that we need to do to take forward the neighbourhood model. And that the neighbourhood model has a particular emphasis on trying to, I suppose, change the way that we deliver services. A lot of things that we currently do within hospitals, we know that we could be doing those closer to people in their communities, and a lot of that is about how we'll shift those services in coming years. And we think there's opportunities then, obviously, in how we deliver palliative care services as well, as we begin to. We've always had a direction of trying to see fewer people dying within hospitals. We still have more people dying in hospitals probably than we would want, because we want to see as many people being able to die in the place where they want to end their lives, and largely that's at home, as we all know. So that it's important to us that as we develop the neighbourhood model, we also look at opportunities for palliative care as well, for to do things better and correctly in the future. I've also taken on the role again, because I used to be the co-chair of the Palliative Care and Partnership Programme Board some years ago, but I've taken on the co-chair again, along with Emily Roberts, who's the interim director of nursing within the Public Health Agency. And we've had our first meeting then with the people from a whole range of backgrounds within palliative care, and we're about to have a session, a workshop over the next few weeks thinking about our future priorities. Officially, the palliative care strategy has come to an end, so we've got to think now about what are our priorities going forward. We're going to take into account, obviously, all of the work this committee has done in relation to palliative and end-of-life care, and I think it's a real opportunity for us then to actually reset some of the work that we've been doing, both building on some of the things from the committee, but also other things that we're looking at that are developments elsewhere and so on that we might want to see developed too. We're also very conscious that we have a relatively small team working on this within SPPG. We're in the process of trying to supplement that with more staff as well, because we know this work is going to require more of a team. So we really are focused on trying to begin to move this, I think, in much more in a neighbourhood direction, but also in making sure that we're developing palliative and end-of-life care as well. Okay,
thank you. So, I mean, there's a restructuring going on within the department, or is it fair to say that the restructuring going on within the department is actually helping to put a focus on palliative care?
I think so.
100%. Okay. Well, that will certainly be welcomed by this committee. Just kind of talking to something else that the committee had recommended in its inquiry about putting the focus was the clinical lead. Mm-hmm. So it'd be useful to get an update on where we're at with the position of a clinical lead.
Yeah, I will. So we were very conscious of the need to do that, but we do want to obviously follow due process. We are developing a job description, and we are hoping in the autumn to begin to recruit to that post. But in the interim, we've asked Dr. Yvonne McGivern if she would take on the role for at least the next 3 months. And Yvonne, I don't know if you know her, she's a GP in Dramara, but she's actually the Macmillan Palliative Care lead in the South Eastern Trust area. And she's also worked with me in the past when I was involved in the cancer programme. Yvonne was our primary care clinical lead. So Yvonne's agreed to take that on an interim basis, which is really important for us because, one, she brings a huge amount of experience and knowledge in this space, and she also crosses across the various sectors within health and social care as well. But on top of that, I think it's also quite timely because we'll be able to get her to feed into some of the work that we'll describe as the meeting goes along, Chair, in terms of the baseline studies, some of the work we're doing on sort of bed specifications and so on. But Yvonne brings a real wealth of knowledge, and she's agreed to take this role on, and I'm certainly very keen, as we all are, to support her in that. And there might be opportunities for the committee to have to get to talk to Yvonne in coming months as well.
Okay, so she's going to be an interim, and then the potential for...
And we'll recruit then to the substantively the post in the autumn.
Okay, and I mean, obviously the committee was disappointed at our last session just with some of the answers we were getting to our questions about our report. So, I mean, we made the assertion that we felt that the department was kind of trying to kick some of the recommendations down the line, whilst saying that you've accepted them. There wasn't a lot of work going on to implement them. So are we any further forward down the line today in terms of a timeline of when we can see progress in some of the other things within our inquiry report?
Well, I suppose, I mean, there's been a few things that have moved on since we were last year. So Paul's already outlined the work on the clinical lead. And the other, I guess, significant development since then is the work on the funding for the hospices. So you're probably aware, but just to kind of the recommendation from yourselves was to move to look at the baseline comparator to get to a kind of a proper 50%, and then to look to escalate beyond that up to 100%. And at the time we said that we supported a sustainable model, but we didn't give a kind of a time commitment and understood the challenge around that. So since then, we've done two things. We met with the Hospital Alliance to kind of understand their pressures, and we've agreed to do a review of the underlying comparator. That's going to be an independent review. So Roger can give us detail as need be, but that's really looking to work with the Hospice Alliance on a fair methodology and a fair process to get to a fair bed comparator, so that they can be satisfied that they're properly funded at that level. And as an immediate step, we've agreed, the Minister's agreed, to provide interim funding up right now worth 1.6 million. That's 1.1 for the adult sector and $500,000 for. So that those are kind of, I think, some very tangible evidence of just how seriously we are taking this and of progress on that. I'll let Roger come in a second. Just on the wider question on the kind of the timeline, we're working on our kind of implementation plan, and we I'm not sure when we've got a date, but we'll have that well developed and ready for your scrutiny when we're due back in the autumn. we're working with stakeholders on that, so it's not just the department on its own cooking it up, but we I just to manage expectations, I'm not expecting that we'll produce a 27-point plan that addresses one by one the 27 recommendations, but rather you will see all of your recommendations progress through a number of kind of key work streams or key areas. I think that just gets into a more manageable but still transparent space. So timescale for that is we're working on that. We want to make sure that we bring people with us on that, and that it's moving where all parties are kind of happy with both the direction and the pace of that. But we're working towards that for the autumn. Do you want to say about the funding?
Yeah, Chair. The work on the cost comparator is live and has already started. So we have an initial draft. I am working with the Chair of the Hospice Alliance, and we've already met, and we have an early first draft in terms of the terms of reference on that piece of work. I'm due to meet the Chair again tomorrow afternoon to continue that piece of work. I'm keen for a full line of sight in this with partners, so that the scoping exercise and the independence of this work has as much confidence by us all in that space. I have also reached out to a potential independent reviewer. The chair of Hospice NI is content with that. I met with that individual on Monday this week. With a view then that we would present our final scope to that individual. At the risk of not agreeing timelines with the chair of Hospice NI, I would certainly hope that we get a draft done towards the end of July, with a view of engaging more formally, if you like, with this potential independent reviewer, and that will allow us to do two things. Committee and essentially test the timelines that we would have put in for the delivery, and obviously get that input or qualification in that space, and then build a schedule of works. How soon can we start in this piece as well?
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to Diane now.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I suppose really just to, because we don't understand the roles all in SPPG, and it's SPPG, to be honest, is a bit of a mystery to most of us in this committee. It would be really brilliant if we could have a note of all of that, because then we would know who to contact, wouldn't we, Paul?
Certainly can.
And that would be an excellent thing. So it seems that we have moved a bit, and to be fair, that's fine. Can I go back to the scoping exercise? And I think that is important. So the scoping exercise was promised, Gearóid, I think within 6 months. I don't know, it's been now about a year and a half, and we still have no scoping exercise. I keep a note in this notebook for the Health Committee meetings. So in the Health Committee meeting at the start of June with the hospices, Trevor McCartney said that the scoping exercise couldn't continue, and the data couldn't continue because there was a structural, I'm just quoting because I wrote it down exactly, weakness in the evidence base. And when I asked about that further, I was told that there just simply isn't data around what is available in terms of palliative care, and therefore the scoping exercise should stop, and that you should move, just basically say, look, sorry, we need to move on, and so on. So where is the scoping exercise? I've read the paper, and we seem to be still in process. Did the department not know what palliative care provision there was? And if there is no data, what are you doing about that? How are you moving that forward? And I mean, I think we all get to the stage where we just have to say, look, we made a mistake, and that's it, and we need to move it on. I'm happy to be in that space, but I don't want it to go on for another 2 years till this committee says cheerio to everybody, and everybody breathes a sigh of relief and says, glad they're gone. Can we know where it is? Are we going to give up on it? What are we doing?
I'll take that, and I know Roger and Paul can come in if need be. I suppose, I mean, as the person who said it would take 6 months, I should speak first on this. No, it's been a lot more challenging than anticipated. I think, I've been in fairly frequent conversation with Trevor about this too. I think he would agree that whilst it's been very challenging, it's been worthwhile. There has been useful, and there is useful learning that we can and will take from this. But I think, as it says in the paper, there's three main elements to this. Your question was, did we not know what's already out there? The answer is no, we didn't. We didn't
Were you potentially funding? What were we throwing money up?
Well, I think
hoping that it was okay. Well, and because we didn't know really what we were doing.
Well, there's a range of different arrangements out there. We knew that there was a variety out there between services that we commissioned, which we got full line of sight of and we can fully account for, services which the trusts have commissioned directly themselves, and other services which are provided, just by other arrangements. So the purpose of the scoping exercise was threefold. One was to get a proper landscape of all of that. Two was to understand where are the gaps and what need is out there that isn't been met by what we're providing. And three is around patient experience. So I think those are the right things to look at, to get a proper sense of what the landscape is and the need and the quality. That was the right thing to try and do. Now, it's been really, really difficult to get the data. The first strand of that, the one around scoping what's out there, that work really commenced last autumn. I think the first meeting was in August of last year, was the first programme board. Roger co-chairs that with Liz Cuddy from the Evora Hospice, I should say. And they've got proper stakeholder buy-in and line of sight on that. But it's been really, really difficult to get. One of the things we uncovered is that whilst there may be agreed data sets and definitions, it's not always captured in the same way, or it's not always recorded consistently. We know that there is under-reporting in primary care, for example, it's not the case we think that people aren't getting seen or getting treated properly. It's that it's not getting captured or recorded in a uniform way. So where we are at now is we are trying to, I guess, take a half a step back, take stock of how far we've got and how then we move forward. There's a report that came to me and to Roger and the chair literally on Tuesday gone by, and I've been off ill this week, so that report's now it's in draft still because it has to be fully socialised with the full membership of that group, but there is a report that really takes stock as to how far we've got and what we can learn from this. Because I think what we want to get to is to move from a pure data gathering exercise into something more action oriented around it. How do we start making positive change for the future? And part of that will be informed by what we've learned. Part of it will be informed by what we know about what's not there. So where we know we don't have the right data from our exercise, is there good usable proxy data we can use to allow us to make a start? And then while we are working to then build in better reporting, or we mentioned the clinical lead, through new roles, kind of driving new behaviours to try and capture stuff a bit better. So it's been a disappointment, personally and professionally, that we haven't got to where we wanted to get to, certainly in a reasonable time frame. We want to make sure that we continue to work. We want to pivot though into a more action-oriented space and building on what's been learned so far.
And if I might just add a bit, because I think Gearóid's is very clear in terms of the position. And because I've been around long enough, I've been with palliative care in different guises over the years. And certainly we had a good line of sight, as Gearóid's already said, in relation to the things that we had commissioned directly, whether we'd commissioned them as a health and social care board, whether they commissioned them as SPPG, or indeed as local commissioning groups in the past as well. But there was also a point then where we actually were providing trusts with demographics funding specific for demographic change, of which obviously the Aging Society was a particular focus. And trusts at that time used some of that funding for palliative care, but in different ways. And we didn't have enough line of sight in relation to that, because that wasn't what was required. And I think as the work has gone on in relation to the baseline scoping, we're beginning now to gather all that information together. I think it has been a useful exercise for us to do. It has taken longer, as again has been described, than we expected it to take, but it's a complex programme. And palliative care in some places happens very cleanly by one organisation their main sort of raison d'etre is palliative care, but then we'll have other organisations, not least our trusts, who will provide palliative care as parts of other services. So I think we're beginning to gather that information together. I think the committee, when we have it over the next few months, will find that interesting and useful, but there will still be gaps. But I think it'll at least take us, in my view, 70-80% to where we need to get, and should give us the kind of basis then for actually identifying where those gaps are for the future that we're going to have to address.
Can I just ask then about funding for hospices? So you're doing some work on the issue of funding, and there has been 1.6 million and 500,000 of that. Or is the 500,000
500,000 for children?
No, it's 1.1 and 500.
Right, so 1.1 divided between the hospices and 500,000 for the children's hospice. That still leaves the hospices in a critical funding gap, and you have commenced a process, and I don't know, I mean this respectfully, but these processes are interminable. They just go on and on forever. But that won't help the funding gap that the hospital or the hospice has. So is there any move, or can there be a move to actually providing additional funding which would stabilise the hospice sector? Because in my conversation with hospices, they indicate that it is ever more difficult to have charitable funding. And because they're not funded per bed in the way that they should be funded, then I think that they're still going to continue in crisis. And the timeline that you have indicated in your paper for working on the issue of the bed and how general medical as opposed to specialist bed costs is going to take the most of this financial year. That still leaves the hospices in a very, very precarious situation. And as I've said many, many times in this committee, we plan for birth, but in this society and in this health service, we do not plan or fund for people in their most vulnerable time of life. And palliative care is not funded in any shape or form in the way it should be. So the crisis is going to continue while you work on this review. So how are you going to work with them in that? Because 1.1 million split over the hospital won't go anywhere to plugging that gap. We need to do more.
Well, it will help. I think 1.6.
No, I'm not saying it won't help, Paul. And the hospices were very clear about that. No one is saying it won't help, but it won't cut it, and it won't stop the hospice being back here saying, we have a crisis, we potentially have to close beds in the children's hospice. That means an awful lot to families who cannot get the care that they need. And my understanding is that the children's hospice in particular have had a number of end-of-life cases that have been very tragic and very difficult, and families require support at this time. So we have a lot of process in this paper. I suppose that's where I'm going. We have a lot of process, but not a lot of action.
Well, as has already been said, I think we have recognised that in this year we should provide some additional funding, and we have done that. I think, having been involved 7-8 years ago in the discussions with the hospice at that time about meeting their 50% costs, I remember all of the work we did at that stage around the kind of agreeing definitions and so on. I mean, I appreciate things have moved on, and the definitions we agreed back then are no longer accepted. But I think we still have to have a basis upon which to fund. That is, there's an expectation on us that we have a basis on which to fund. I think we're working very constructively, as has already been described, in terms of finding that basis. But I don't think we can do that any quicker than we're doing it, but we're going pretty fast at the same time. I think there's work to be done with the hospices. We need to be clear about what it is that 100% actually represents. The variance then between the hospices, because all of the hospices will have different costs because they provide varying services appropriately, but varying services nonetheless. So work will have to be done. We're hoping that by at least trying to offer some additional support in this year, that will give us some time to actually do that constructively with the hospices. Because if we don't do it constructively now and we don't find a position which is genuinely satisfactory, we'll be back at this again in a couple of years' time. And I don't think that's in anyone's
Paul, you'll
interest.
be back at it before the end of the financial year.
Because
actually,
I have to accept
what you're actually doing now is process, but we're waiting a long time for this process. You know, I don't want to go back to scope and exercise, but it was 1.5 years ago and we're no further forward with it. I suppose the point I really want to forcefully make is that the hospice provides a service like no other. I actually think the hospice movement is one of the great movements of our time, and one of the most compassionate movements of our time. But we need to fund it. We need to fund it. We cannot totally, and it is so now reliant. What is it about? Only about 20-25% of actual hospice costs are actually met by the health service in Northern Ireland. I mean, it's just not a tenable position for us to be in at a stage when it is ever more difficult to raise money. I mean, it's not good enough that we're funding end-of-life care through bake sales and charity. It's not.
And we will work at pace, I assure you. And certainly as someone taking on this brief, I want to work at pace as well. But I think it's important also to emphasise that we have other challenges in palliative and end-of-life care that we're also going to have to progress in relation to this, and that's why it's important that we have a broader sense of the palliative and end-of-life care. Hospice is important, but there are other aspects as well that are important, and I think we've got to look across the services.
My final question to you is, in terms of the neighbourhood model of care, and the famous 2% that trusts are to devote to this, are you requiring any of that to be in a general hub for palliative care, or to make that available to palliative care?
We haven't progressed enough in relation to that, but that may be an option for us. But I think that's some of the things as we put in place our integrated neighbourhood teams that they will look at.
So that's some way off as well.
It's certainly not going to be in place. I think in this year.
This financial year, will it?
I don't think so.
Can I just, Dan, if I can go back, it's just, I mean, I take your point on the 1.6, and I think just to reassure you that we didn't come up with the figure itself. That was based on our engagement with all the hospices and what they needed as a stabilisation payment in year. I take your point on the timeline for the comparator review piece, but we're working with the hospices really closely on that to make sure that's right, and really from our point of view to make sure that there's continuity, so that there's no gap between, say, the end of this year and then the commencement of whatever the outworkings are from that review. So there should be, I mean, it's not just empty, it's not just process. I mean, we've taken action now, and then we're following through on that in partnership with the Hospice Alliance.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Danny?
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for coming back to see us again. And certainly I would agree with the other members that there is some progress to be noted here. And certainly great to hear about the palliative care lead. So you've got somebody in place for a 3-month interim, and then you'll still be recruiting then in the autumn, is that correct?
That's right.
Well, interim, yeah. If it needs to, that can be extended if it needs to be, but yeah, at minimum, be that long.
Okay, and good to hear about the independent review of the bed comparator. This had been quite a sticking point. I know it is raised in quite a few meetings. So good to have an independent review of that. That will obviously clarify a bit more. Can I ask, obviously this is going to have a huge effect on funding going forward, then the 50% funding and then moving to 100 as the ambition that this is. Can I ask just about, you do have a trust funded palliative care unit at Andrew Murray Hospital, the Macmillan unit. Mm-hmm. Do you have a figure as to the cost of a bed in the Macmillan unit? Is that going to factor into the independent review of the bed comparator price?
Well, Danny, yes. So as part of the scoping exercise, we would quite rightly seek this independent reviewer to look at local cost comparators and equivalents, and also across these islands and the HSC. So that would certainly form part of that broader consideration.
Okay, thank you. And good to see as well, the implementation plan and the action plan is going to be drawn up and then shared with the committee in the autumn, correct?
Yep, 100%.
Good, no problem. Thank you. Just to, it's a bit of a frustration of mine. I'm sure you'll be aware of the relatively small amounts of money that, compared to the full healthcare budget that the hospice are asking for. The 1.6 million from the stabilisation payment that you'd mentioned there, Gearóid, you had said that this was a figure drawn up with the hospices, that this is the figure that they needed. Is that correct?
Yeah, when that was, with the chair of the Alliance had been in contact, and when we talked about a level of funding, that was the number that came forward.
So they said they needed 1.6 million in order to be stabilised for this year?
Well, that was the figure that was put forward.
By
Trevor.
Okay. No problem. I'm just going to go back just in a vague comparison. I know this morning we had an audit office report that said there was £40 million of an estate in vacant buildings sitting there. So obviously there is a bit of a frustrating comparison in between the amount of money that the hospices are looking for and other areas within the health service. But obviously that's not your role.
Sorry, Danny, can I correct myself? I don't want to mislead the committee. So in conversation, just on the origin of the 1.1, it kind of emerged from conversation around what would an equitable, a suitable uplift. Look, I couldn't say for sure that number was put forward by their side, but it was one that Trevor had been discussed with Trevor at the time. So it didn't come from Treasurer in the first instance.
Sorry, you've confused me a wee bit there, Gearóid. Can you go back on that?
I want to correct the record. I didn't want to give the impression that the number had been volunteered by the hospice side, but in discussion with the hospice side around what a suitable figure would be, that was the number that was agreed on, but it wasn't proposed by their side.
Who proposed that figure then? Where did it come from?
Well, the conversation was around what a level of uplift might look like. So the figure was approximately a 10% uplift at current levels, which equated to 1.1. Then there was a further 500, which did come from Trevor on the children's side.
Okay. No problem. Thanks for clearing that up. Thank you. And thanks again for coming in today. And we look forward to seeing the action plans then in the autumn. Thank you.
Okay. So again, just like others said, you know by the frequency that we invite you that this committee is not going to drop this issue. So we look forward to some of the things that you've said we're going to see over the summer and certainly in the autumn, and we look forward to seeing real progress made on this issue. So we're relying a wee bit of latitude today in terms of some of the other processes, but we really want to see implementation moving forward, particularly with our inquiry report and our recommendations. So the next time we meet, we'll be expecting lots of progress. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Okay. We're just going to pause the meeting just for a short break. So we're going to go on to non-public.
Committee Room 29. Sound. Committee Room 29. Sound.
So, written briefing, Department of Health briefing, elective care framework, governance, delivery, outcomes. So we've got a written briefing from the department on the elective care framework. It's page 146. Any commentary? Okay, item number 9, written briefing on children's social care services review. So that is at page 157 of our pack. If anybody has any commentary. Okay, item number 10, again, rural proofing and regional access to services within the transformation agenda, written briefing. So that is on page 186. Any commentary? Okay, item number 11, retention disposal schedule, Muckmore Abbey Hospital inquiry. So, members, this is a memo from the department on the retention and disposal schedule, Muckmore Abbey Hospital inquiry, and that's at page 193 of our pack. So this schedule has been produced following completion of the Muckamore Abbey Hospital inquiry. This retention disposal schedule sets out the disposal arrangements for all records created or received by the inquiry. So are members content with the retention and disposal schedule for the inquiry as indicated?
Who sets out those? Are those statutory limits?
So the inquiry itself will set it out, and then it's a case of the committee has sought view whether it's content, but it's actually Department of Communities who have prony will take forward the actions in it. So it comes to us for review if we're content. It follows a lot of the other inquiries that have happened as well, so there's similar schedules to those inquiries.
So there's normal practice and procedures. Okay, members, item number 12, correspondence. So can I refer everybody to correspondence in the main pack from page 216, and that also includes a correspondence index as normal at page 218, and there's also one in table papers at page 21. So we've got correspondence from the Minister at tab 12.14 regarding the Indian Nurses Forum here. I think, will that letter be published?
It hasn't been published, no.
I think, personally speaking, I think there's, it would be nice if we published that letter on our webpage. It's essentially a letter from the Indian Forum here, just really concerned about the kind of upsurge in hatred around the incident that we're all aware of that led to racist violence across the north. Just them, and they say here in their letter, it's a lengthy letter, but we came here not to cause harm, but to serve, care and contribute every day and night. Thousands of overseas healthcare workers stand beside local colleagues in hospitals, GP practices, nursing homes and communities, caring for the sick, comforting families and helping save lives. So it outlines how they are contributing to society here, particularly within our healthcare, and an appeal to politicians, as you would expect, to urge for calm and all the rest of it, and apply common sense. I think, I don't know if it's normal, but it might be a nice thing if we publish that letter if people are content.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's also correspondence from the Minister at page 1215, page 215, regarding response from the Northern Trust regarding early supported discharge for stroke patients. So I don't know if anybody has any commentary on that. No. Okay, there's, the committee will obviously receive correspondence over the summer period, so I'm going to ask members if we're content that we receive detail of the correspondence in 2 batches during recess, depending on the level of responses received from the department or any urgent correspondence received. Content with that? Okay, are we happy with the correspondence index then? Okay, thank you. Forward work programme. So forward work programme is there from September onwards. Just note that we have a provisional date on the 1st of September for meeting with the chair of the Muckamore Abbey inquiry. Details still to be confirmed, and they'll be issued to members over recess. So we're meeting with the department on the 3rd.
Department and the trust.
And the 3rd, yep, on that subject. So we really want to meet with the inquiry team in advance of that. So I don't know about other health committees, but we're certainly back in early, showing people how much how hard work this committee does. But these are vitally important aspects of our work, so it's important that we get back early to give them the attention and the care that they require. Everybody content?
Yeah.
Okay, any other business? Can I just thank members for the work of the committee throughout the past session, the work of members, but also can I also thank committee staff for their work over the last session. It's been we've done a lot of work, a lot of good work, a lot of hard work, so I just want to thank everybody, staff and members, and wish Shannon congratulations. She's going to get married over the summer, so I hope you have a good day. Date, time, place of next meeting. Next formal committee meeting is Thursday, 3rd September, 2 p.m. in room 29. Meeting adjourned.
Committee Room 29, Sound. 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 Committee Room 29, Sound.